someone else's hypothesis, rather, I would like to explain to you what psychopathy is. So, psychopathy is oftentimes mistaken for psychosis because they both begin with the word psycho. But it's actually not the same thing. Psychosis is a break from reality where someone has a hard time understanding between fact and fiction. Or, so like, someone with psychosis they'll have hallucinations, auditory hallucinations. So they'll see and hear shit that generally isn't there. From my understanding, for the most part, it's auditory rather than visual hallucinations. But psychopathy is basically a construct, not an actual official mental health diagnosis, but a construct that is used to understand antisocial personality disorder. And when I say and oftentimes people use the term psychopath and ASPD interchangeably. Some people do. But the definition I'm using is a subset of antisocial personality disorder that is defined by having extremely low anxiety and callous and unemotional traits. Okay. So, basically, conventional wisdom in psychology is that this construct of antisocial personality disorder is more common in men than it is in women because something evolutionary psychology, something genetics, something chromosomes, blah blah blah. But there are some who actually argue differently. So, as many people who are well aware of psychology and neurodiversity may already know, the conventional wisdom that autism was more common in men than it was in women is actually being challenged right now. The counter-argument that is used by people such as myself is that because both men and women are socialized very, very, very differently from a very young age, that it causes autism in women to express itself much differently. Women, because of societal pressures to be more social and be more agreeable, learn strategies to hide their autism, whether or not they even know that they have it. This is called masking. And people who believe the same about psychopathy, and by the way, psychopathy and autism, two separate, completely different things. They're not the same thing. They're absolutely not the same thing. They have more or less nothing in common. But anyway, there are some who argue that because men and women are socialized differently, that it's not that psychopathy exists less in women. It's that psychopathy manifests differently in women. And this lines up with the theory of epigenetics, that an organism with a given genetic predisposition, the expression of their genetic predisposition will be determined by environmental factors. Okay? So someone with a genetic predisposition to being fearless, callous, and unemotional, and lacking in emotional empathy, which is what psychopaths more or less are, although there's other factors as well. Basically, depending on how they're raised, their genetic predisposition will express itself in a different way. And basically, because women are socialized to be more agreeable and keep the peace, good girl there, so that basically the psychopathy in women will express itself differently. So the conventional path to becoming a psychopath is showing signs of antisocial behavior. And when I say antisocial, I don't mean like staying in when people are partying. I'm talking about like of a lot of people who have psychopathy, who have the genetic trait of psychopathy, who are later diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, is they'll start doing those bad things at a very young age. They'll start setting things on fire, hurting small animals, hurting people, bullying other children, just generally being little shits. And now some people with these issues, this is more or less what conduct disorder is. Some people with conduct disorder, children with conduct disorder, some of them will grow out of it, but others will not grow out of it. And the ones that don't grow out of it will end up being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. So if you're 18 years old and you're still doing the same manipulative little shit things that you did as a kid, the conduct disorder that I described, oftentimes you end up being diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. So the argument was basically argued that with women, the antisocial behavior might express itself differently. So rather than a woman as a child, setting things on fire, hurting small animals, directly hurting people physically, their expression might be a little bit more subtle. They might just tell a lot of lies. They might go behind people's backs. They might cause a lot of issues. They might engage in cyberbullying. And these, of course, are things that would fly more under the radar. And this causes these girls / women to go undiagnosed. Because someone who cyberbullies is less likely to come to the attention of police authorities, for example, than someone who burns shit to the ground and directly hurts people around them. So that is the theory of psychopathy in women, and I actually do agree with it because I find it a logical conclusion of the theory of epigenetics, which is, of course, that people have a genetic predisposition, and the genetic predisposition's expression is controlled by the environment. And if I'm going to argue that because of the different ways that men and women are socialized, that autism in women manifests differently than it does in men, then I don't see how I could stay consistent with that theory, hypothesis, whatever you want to call it, and say that women with but in the case of psychopathy, it's genetically more likely to occur in men than it is with women. So I just see it as an extension of my approval of the theory of epigenetics and my approval in the belief that certain mental illnesses, disabilities, constructs, different cognitions, whatever you want to call them, express themselves differently